Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi, Robert Martin and Nasser al-Mashni. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Australia's only radio program that is totally dedicated to the Palestinian cause in English language. In today's episode we will be talking about these similarities between Australia and Israel, and also we will revisit the mass hunger strike of the Palestinian prisoners. For this and more, stay with us and enjoy the episode. Good morning, Nasser and Robert.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, guys.
Happy Saturday.
And this week we have an important update about our upcoming prisoners event on Sunday. But before that, we're going to start with the main topic today, the comparison/similarity between Australia and Israel from a purely colonial
context. Context. So just to give people an idea of the similarities between Australia that was settled with Captain Cook, on the concept that Australia was terra nullius, that there was nobody here, and the founding principles of Zionism and Palestine also being a terra nullius. So I might just start, Yusuf. One of the things that often gets lost in this in the context of the debate is that first understanding of the First Nations of Australia and the First Nation people of Palestine that were there, and when we understand that conflict from the context of a settler colonialist enterprise, and so that's what colonialism is. It's in fact, a settler colonialism is taking somebody's land to move your people there. Now, colonialism can take two other types of forms, and one of those is from a resource point of view. We're coming in to take your resources, and some might argue that the second Iraq war was to get oil and resources. And another type of colonialism is to come and take the resource that is the humans, and that's slavery, etc. But in the context of Australia, what we have is Europeans coming to a land that was not European and turning it into Australia, ethnically cleansing and killing the indigenous peoples. And the parallel to Palestine is exactly the same. European peoples coming to a land that was occupied by indigenous people and taking that land, continuously occupied by those people, living there, and taking that land off them violently. Now, the parallels again in Australia, Aboriginals resisted the wild colonial boys.
The land theft.
As you would. It's a natural reaction.
It's a natural reaction.
Protect your land, protect your family.
Protect your family. And when you look at the sort of resistance that happened in Tasmania, the Aboriginal resistance that occurred in Tasmania, I mean,
the whole population.
The genocide, absolute genocide that occurred in Tasmania. And the parallel there to, 1947, 48, 49, and I know, Yusuf, we're going to talk about Nakba in the next coming weeks as we approach the 70th anniversary of 1948. The parallels are absolute. The ethnic cleansing, the massacres, the disaster that befell the Palestinians, and the parallels with our First Nation people.
So they're the shared values that Australia and keeps saying that we have with Israel. Nothing to be proud of.
Before Nasser, you start, I was surprised a couple of weeks ago to read a post by a Zionist Australian in Sydney creating similarity between Israel and the Aboriginal community here, saying that what they have in common is the rebirth of hope. And, of course, trying to contain the advocacy for Aboriginal rights here in Australia within their Zionist umbrella. So
it's absolutely sick.
Which is absurd.
Yeah.
But I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. One of the things that when we talk about Palestinian resistance to Israeli apartheid in that context of settler colonialism, it removes the Islamic question. This is not Islamism. It's not anti-Semitism. It's you took my home. I don't care who you are. So there's a very famous Israeli historian. His name is Benny Morris. And this is a guy who's very famous for saying, yeah, we're a settler colonial enterprise. Yeah, we ethnically cleansed Palestine. So So, what are you going to do about it? We were the stronger party. There was a war. We won. Get over it. He's in fact, I remember reading something where he was really upset that the 6-Day War in 1967 was so quick. In fact, the tanks got in front of the Palestinians. And by virtue of the fact that the tanks got from the Green Line to the Jordan River quicker than the people could get pushed out in front of them. That's the problem that Israel has today, is that the tanks were too quick in 1967.
As opposed to 48, where the tanks had to, excuse me, the ethnic cleansing of the landowners took place before the progress of tanks. So I also want to remind the listeners with the name of this book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, by Ilan Pape.
Yeah. So Benny Morris notes in his Righteous Victims, this is one of his early books, that the early Zionists viewed Arabs as primitive, dishonest, fatalistic, lazy, savage, much as European colonialists viewed the natives elsewhere in Asia and Africa. Now, these are the same words that our colonial boys described the native Aboriginals of Australia. So word for word. I mean, the parallels are beyond the pale. So then we go to those early Zionists and the influx of Jewish Europeans into Palestine post the 1890s into World War I. And there was not enough of them to create a Jewish state. There were nowhere near a majority. In fact, by 1914, there were 740,000 Palestinians and around 60,000 Jews, who were Palestinian Jews, obviously. Now, the Zionists, as we know, the Zionists sought to get the favour of both the Ottomans, and when the Ottomans said no, they won't sell Palestine to the European Jews, they then sought the favour of the British. And from there we went through to the Balfour Declaration, and then from post-World War I, the Mandate of Palestine. And I've just recently found a quote from Lord Balfour, and famously in the Balfour Declaration it talks about not prejudicing the civil rights of the indigenous, of the people that are already in Palestine. In private, Lord Balfour confessed in less diplomatic terms, Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in future hopes of far profounder import than the desire and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. In my opinion, that is right. In essence, that's the Zionist terra nullius.
That is the real Balfour Declaration.
That is the real Balfour Declaration.
And there was a document, correspondence between Balfour and, I think, the British Commissioner to India in probably the same year of Balfour Declaration.
So basically, in other words, we're much better than them.
Yeah.
Let's take it over. Don't worry about the indigenous.
So let's go back to the similarities between Australia and Israel from the colonialism point of view.
So in that point, the Zionists originally claimed that land was empty, and then when they saw that it wasn't, they decided that their interests as white settlers were greater than those that were indigenous. In Australia, the same thing. Settlers quickly adjusted their experience. They said, well, it's our land. No, there's somebody here, right? Our interests are more important. Their civilization hasn't evolved to the point of understanding ownership, therefore they can't own it. And there we go. And then you get to post World War II, and the Balfour Declaration gets enacted. The Jewish immigration into Palestine is accelerated to a significant greater extent, and we get to that point where every other country around Palestine is given independence, whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc. But Palestine, a mandate is created, and that word mandate is first used there, and it's in the form of a trusteeship. You savages aren't ready yet for independence or the concept of democracy.
You're not civilized enough
you're not civilized.
to run your own country.
We'll call this mandate. And the Mandate of Palestine post-World War I into World War II facilitated an amazing immigration of Jewish people. And obviously, the Palestinians resisted. Interestingly, out of every 1,000 people that left Europe, this is between World War I and World War II, so it's pre-Holocaust, of every 1,000 people that left Europe, only 4 in 1,000 went to Palestine. Most of them went to the United States.
You're talking about the Jewish migration out of Europe.
Out of Europe.
Between World War I and World War II.
When offered the chance to go to biblical ancient lands, these Europeans went, No, I'll go to the United States, thanks.
I'll give it a miss. Which proves that the turning point to the Jewish migration to Palestine was the Holocaust.
Yeah. And European guilt for a European disease called anti-Semitism.
Yep.
Not Palestinians.
And on the contrary, the Jews in the Muslim countries like Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, Syria, Lebanon, or elsewhere were protected.
So throughout the mandate period, the Zionists camouflaged their plan. And, whether it was Ben-Gurion, he in fact testified in the Peel Commission in 1937, and he said, if Palestine were uninhabited, we might have asked for a Jewish state, for then it would not harm anyone else. But there are residents in Palestine, and just as we do not wish to be at the mercy of others, they too have a right not to be at the mercy of Jews. Now, this is David Ben-Gurion, who ultimately became the first Prime Minister of Israel.
So what happened to those comments?
Well, it's all a subterfuge. Because concurrently within the Zionist organisation, Jablonski, who wrote The Iron Wall, and this guy was Ariel Sharon on steroids, crazy Zionist, we should shoot him, we've got to come straight out. And this is in the 1920s. He was saying, we need a war, we need to clean this country out of all of the indigenous Palestinians. The only way to have our homeland for the Jewish people is for it to be free of anyone who is not Jewish, and we need to precipitate that war now. And he was, on it all the time. And it wasn't until 1942, so this is 5 years after the Peel Commission, that the Zionists officially adopted the concept that Palestine was to be a Jewish commonwealth. So Jablonski actually went on and said, and he observed, and to his credit was truthful, he said, every indigenous people will resist alien settlers as long as they see any hope of ridding themselves of the danger of foreign settlements. I mean, it's human nature that people will resist. And that's where he really urged the Zionists to go, crazy. He compared Palestinians to the Aztecs and the Sioux Indians and the Apaches of North America. Ben-Gurion privately agreed, and this was another letter, were I an Arab, I would rise up against immigration, liable sometime in the future to hand the country over to Jewish rule. What Arab cannot do this math? Understanding that an immigration at the rate of 60,000 a year means a Jewish state in all of Palestine.
I also want to touch on the complicity of Britain. It's not just a mandate where they opened the gate for Jewish migration and maintained the civil and human rights of the Palestinians. There were a complicit plan to create institutions. Absolutely. Because if you look at the institutions, whether a university, whether Histadrut, whether the central bank, or any of the major later became Israeli institutions, the roots of it started in the 1920s under the protection and eyes and sometimes funding of the British mandate.
Without question.
And therefore they spent the 25 years of mandate building institutions, arming militias. Of course, the last 2 years the violence escalated, but there was a master plan that the Palestinians started to see as early as the 20s, and of course it justified the Grand Revolution in the 30s and onwards.
Yeah, correct. And Yusuf, you mentioned Ilan Pape's book before, but the grand plan was called Plan Dalet. The Zionists were mapping villages, village elders, roads, transport, the villages that they needed to take first strategically. Anyway, coming back to Ben-Gurion, he accepted that Palestinians were reasonable in opposing the creation of the Jewish state. And in another letter he said, there's been anti-Semitism, the Nazis, Hitler, Auschwitz, but was that their fault? They only see one thing. We have come here and stolen their country. Why should they accept that? By 1939, there was 1 million Palestinians in Palestine, 400,000 Jews. 1,070,000 Palestinians, 460,000 Jews. In other words, the Jews had gone from being less than 10% to something of the order of 30%, entirely due to the complicity of the British.
And this 30% didn't control 30% of the land.
No.
They were on less than 6% of the land.
Yep.
But nevertheless, the partitioning of Palestine gave them more than half of the land.
More than half, 55%, that's right.
And how would you expect the Palestinians to be fine with that? Would you, as Robert, as an Australian?
Ben-Gurion also said that if he were Palestinian, he wouldn't accept it.
Yeah.
I mean, he clearly said that.
And the Palestinians...
You wouldn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the Palestinians didn't accept it. And as you spoke just a second ago, Yusuf, we had many uprisings, and famously from, 1936 to 39, where the British systematically killed over 6,000 Palestinians, imprisoned over 6,000 more, exiled many more thousands. This brutal repression was a major factor in the failure of the Palestinians to successfully resist the creation of Israel and the large-scale dispossession that was the Nakba.
And what's changed? Nothing's really changed.
Now it's the American...
It's a more sophisticated but blatant, and it's America doing it every single day, and we're going to cover that a little bit later of what's happened in the last week. Because it's...
So if we go back to the parallels to Australia, and we spoke a moment ago about what happened in Tasmania and the guerrilla warfare that the Aboriginals waged against the colonials, many historians argue that was a genocide. Hundreds of thousands of Aboriginals were killed. And the Australians didn't just practice this repression and large-scale terrorism. They went about deterring Aboriginals from any sort of resistance. And whether it meant, for every one of ours, we're going to kill 10 of yours. They would hang Aboriginals from trees so that fellow tribesmen would see the sort of thing that was going on. And in Australia, the colonialisers basically were successful. I mean, they wiped out enough of the indigenous population as to render the resistance, in fact, futile.
Yeah. There is a figure I have read recently about the hypothetical figure of the Aboriginal population had there no been another state invading. There would have been something like 20 million by today.
Of their own. Yeah.
But actually the figures are less than 1 million.
In Australia, the colonialisers were successful. I mean, the indigenous population is decimated. What we have now is an overwhelming population that isn't Aboriginal in ancient Aboriginal lands. We've got a democracy that gives them the chance to vote, but because there's such a minority, they are dispossessed but living on their own lands. Now, where the parallel ceases to exist is Israel didn't complete its ethnic cleanse and its complete destruction.
That's why they refer to the Palestinians of Israel as the unfinished job.
The unfinished job, but also the demographic threat. I mean, the reality is 20% of the population of Israel proper inside Green Line, 1 in 5 is Palestinian.
There is an Israeli academic who says that the future of the Palestine-Israel conflict is not going to be decided in battlefields, but in bedrooms.
In bedrooms, yeah. In the wombs, yeah. So in maintaining Israel as a democracy, as the Palestinians increase from 20 to 25, 30 to 40%, is going to be, it's not possible. So this increasing demographic threat is a real issue for them. And the question is, as a humanitarian, as a Democrat, as a libertarian, you might want a state for all of its citizens. But that isn't what Israel is about. Israel is a state for the Jewish people. And this is where the difference between Australia and Israel sort of start to diverge. Australia doesn't seek to drive out the indigenous population. The job's being done. You're at 1% or 2% of the population. Really don't need to do anything. The ongoing situation in Palestine, the continuing Nakba, is to finish the job of erasing the Palestinian land of Palestinians, which, as we know, they won't be successful with. So Australian racism has changed into some sort of normalcy through a democratic process by marginalising the Aboriginals to a point. But political Zionism has not. The same level of racist...
it's open too. It's open racism.
It still exists. So,
You're listening to Palestine Remembered on 855 AM, and we will come back after the break. We're going to listen to a Sufi lyrics song made by عمر خيرت. والله ما طلعت شمس ولا غربت إلا وحبك مقرون بأنفاسي, by عمر خيرت and الحلاج.
ولا فلوت إلى قوم يحدث
الحلاج and عمر خيرت. والله ما طلعت شمس ولا غربت إلا وحبك مقرون بأنفاسي. You're listening to Palestine Remembered on 855 AM. We spoke about the similarities between the colonial projects Australia and Israel, and we are going to continue with the updates about the mass hunger strike that the Palestinian prisoners started on the Palestine Prisoners Day on the 17th of April. So today we're heading towards the 13th day of the hunger strike. It's in fact, they have every reason to protest against their imprisonment, but their demands to be treated humanly, which is, according to international law, this should be an obligation on any or on any country or state that imprisons.
Because the demands were basic human rights, which was one was a phone call, visitation rights. They're things that everybody should be able to get naturally and legally.
Israel systematically tries to inflict as much pain as possible on the families of prisoners by making their family visits nearly impossible, especially when you have elderly women and men coming to see their loved ones. So you will have to be there at as early as 7 o'clock, but then you might not be able to see your son until 3 o'clock, which means that hours and hours of wait.
It's also important to say, international law says that if you're an occupying power, you cannot move prisoners of war or convicted peoples outside of the occupied territory.
And all of the prisoners are not in the occupied territories.
All of the Palestinian prisoners are inside Israel proper, Green Line Israel. And so a Palestinian resident of the West Bank who wants to visit their son who is being detained, we believe illegally, inside Israel, has to apply for a permit, go to a checkpoint, go through the cattle grid, the security check of a 17 or 18-year-old holding an M16 to their face, get let through miraculously, go to the other side, find a taxi, get to the prison, wait in line, get through another screening process, and then at the end of that, in a full day and tens of dollars, and these people are living on tens of dollars a month, and they've spent tens of dollars in this day, arbitrarily, sorry, you can't come in.
Absolutely, and that's why it was important for the prisoners and the Palestinian society to protest in different ways. Of course, the spearhead of the protest is the prisoners and the leader Marwan Barghouti from Fatah and other political parties. We have Ahmed Saadat from PFLP, the leader of PFLP. We have others from DFLP and some of the prisoners from Hamas, Islamic Jihad, even Arab prisoners from Syria, Lebanon and Iraq. So it's mass hunger strike in protest of the inhumane treatment of prisoners that started on the 17th of April. And now they are heading towards the 2 weeks of...
Which is incredible.
Which is incredible on its own. Now, I want to also talk about the solidarity from within the Palestinian society in West Bank, in Gaza Strip, in diaspora, in Europe, in America, here in Australia. We have an event tomorrow. It's everywhere. The Palestinians feel that they are back on track, where and the campus is actually set by the leaders of the of that mass hunger strike. And of course, the solidarity is not only by the Palestinians, but also by Australians, Canadian, Europeans, even some members of the Jewish community of Melbourne. Have signed a statement that we're going to read out tomorrow on our event, and we'll definitely come back with more updates on future episodes. So the hunger strike is still on. The demands are unmet. In fact, since the beginning of the hunger strike, the treatment of prisoners has deteriorated. They were denied access by lawyers. Were not given access to speak to them. No visits. No contact with media. Their own lawyers.
A junior minister in the Knesset said, our prisons are overcrowded anyway. Let them hunger strike, they'll die. There's lots of room 6 feet under.
And that is exactly
this week.
An Israeli minister. That is exactly what we mean by the violation of every level of human rights.
Doesn't that just show the level of...
And they get away with it.
Zionist barbarity. I mean, this is the thing. The theme here, we understand, is that the chains will be broken before our spirit is. We're going nowhere.
Exactly.
The sooner they come to terms, the Zionist racist ideology comes to terms with the fact that as human beings, our right to live on our ancestral lands is equal to, if not greater. We are prepared to share. We can live together in love and harmony and peace. But if you keep doing this, the day of reckoning will come.
And we have every right to resist. And of course, the prisoners have every right to choose the way they protest against their own treatment in Israeli jail. And I think the highest peak of bravery, the highest peak of strength and power is to go on hunger.
Well, they're putting their lives on the line again. They're putting their life on the line.
So all solidarity with our political prisoners in Israel. We're talking about thousands and thousands of prisoners, and we will talk about them as long as their hunger strike is going. We will be with them here on the show.
Absolutely. And we'll just remind our listeners of our phone number 0437 990 415 0437 990 415. We'd love to hear from some listeners. In fact, one of our listeners sent through a text saying, tell us what's going on in Palestine today. And interestingly, I was able to get some data, Yusuf, Rob, about the stuff we don't hear in the media today. And if you add up these incidents and think about what happens, the stuff that we do hear at the end. In the past week, Israeli forces killed a Palestinian man and wounded 7 others, including 3 children in the West Bank. In the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces continued to pursue Palestinian fishermen into the sea and opened fire on Palestinian farmers at the border. Israeli forces conducted 39 incursions into Palestinian communities and 2 in Jerusalem. 40 civilians, including 19 children, were arrested in the West Bank. The contents of 3 bookshops for university services in Hebron were confiscated and the bookshops were closed. Israeli forces continued their efforts to create a Jewish majority in occupied East Jerusalem by demolishing some homes. Hundreds of settlers stormed the Aqsa Mosque as well. Israeli authorities continue to impose a security closure on big chunks of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Dozens of temporary checkpoints were put up. All that happens, and then you might hear of a Palestinian resisting, getting shot.
And that's what you get to hear.
And that's what you get to hear. So that was last week in Palestine. So don't forget, our listeners, 0437 990 415, 0437 990 415.
And on the anniversary, the 70th anniversary of Nakba, we are going to dedicate the next 2 episodes for the expulsion of Palestinians and the theft of their property and land. And of course, with hopefully more news and views from Palestine. And again, I want to emphasize that there is mass hunger strike happening inside Israeli prisons. Until we meet next week, this is Robert, Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Al-Rimawi. Have a great time and salam.
Salam.